Would you have picked up this table curbside? I found this trash library table and turned it into a Sequoia treasure. Today I'm sharing how I kept everything original and highlighted all the imperfections to turn this into a real sweet character piece. Just let me get set up and I'll be right back. Let's start. Here's the fun part. Here's the table I started with. The gentleman who owned it saw me loading it into my FUV, which is short for furniture utility vehicle, wink, wink, and came out to give me a hand. He was a super sweet man. He said it had been sitting in his basement for the last 25 years, and he was so pleased somebody was taking it. I'm always excited to rescue these awesome pieces because, quite honestly, it breaks my heart thinking that they're just going to go into our landfill. Once I brought it home and brought it downstairs into my paint studio, I gave it a really good once over, and it was in pretty rough shape. The top boards weren't even attached anymore. The finish was really rough. But check out these barley twist legs. They are a classic, aren't they? They're just beautiful, and they don't make things like they used to. So I started by giving this piece a really thorough cleaning. I have White Lightning in a spray bottle, and I use a large sponge. I spray on the solution of White Lightning and water, and using a large sponge, I give it a really, really good wipe down. And for curb shop pieces, I will keep cleaning the piece of furniture until this sponge comes out perfectly clean. To make sure these turned legs and all the nooks and crannies of this piece were all clean, I used a dollar store brush, and again, spraying on the TSP Substitute, I just give it a really, really good cleaning in all the little areas that a sponge may miss. Once the piece was thoroughly cleaned, and I had also used a wet sponge just with clean water to remove any residue left on by the cleaner, I started disassembling this piece. I removed the original hardware and then flipped the table onto its top and started unscrewing the tabletop from in behind. Now, if you have a piece that you're able to flip or turn over, this is a really great way to get access to remove the top of your piece. Once all the screws were removed, it was really easy to just lift the bottom part of the body off the top. Who needs a gym when you're a furniture refinisher, right? Once I had the top boards removed from the body of this table, I brought it into my sanding room and started giving everything a really good scuff sanding. Using my Bosch orbital sander and a 150 grit sandpaper, I sanded the entire body. The spindles were scuff sanded by hand. As I was working on this piece and seeing all the imperfections on it, you know what? This piece has history, it has character, and honestly, rather than patch everything up, I thought I'm just going to go with it and keep everything original. I decided to paint it in Sequoia, which is a new color in the silk paint line. It's a red, but it's kind of like a rustic red, I would say. I'll call it a rustic red. It's not a vibrant, lively red. It's more of a muted rustic red, which I thought was perfect for a vintage piece. And check out how beautifully this paint applies. It's a paint and primer and top coat all in one, so I did not need to prime this piece before I started painting. It's really highly pigmented. You can see how much coverage it gets even on the first coat, and it's self-leveling. So once you put it on, you don't need to fuss with it too much. Like, I wouldn't go back in a couple of minutes and try smoothing everything out because you're just going to mess it up. Once it's applied, you brush out all the strokes as best you can, then just leave it be, and it's going to self-level itself out beautifully. When painting the drawers, as I've mentioned in a few of my other videos, I always go in at the edges on an angle. This way I don't need to mask anything off and I have a crisp, clean line. To apply the paint to these classic barley twist legs, I did my slap it on technique, which I will add a card above and also the link in the description down below to the full video on the slap it on technique. And basically what it is with a dry brush, you don't want to be dipping your brush in the paint right before you do this. You want a drier brush. And all you do is slap it on any sort of cylinder spindle piece. And this is so you do not get brush marks when you're painting these spindles. And it works fabulous. Ideally, when I'm doing the slap it on technique, I prefer using a flat brush. Here I am using my 2-inch oval. It was out of sheer laziness, to be quite honest. I didn't want to grab myself a new brush. But if you have a flat brush, 2 or 3 inches, this process goes even faster. So because I decided to keep everything original, now I was going to deal with the top boards. And I took a 60 grit on my orbital sander. I hooked it up to my vacuum, so not to create too much dust. And I started sanding down the scratches, the nicks and crannies, and smooth out the old finish on these boards. The top of this table is so old, but isn't that the amazing thing about wood? I mean, it lasts for years and years and years, and you can just keep refinishing it and turn it into something different. I decided I was going to do a glue up and glue these 2 half pieces of board back together again. So I took my orbital sander and made sure to sand off the edges of these boards, making sure to remove the old finish and any old glue or adhesive that was on it. I wanted a nice clean edge to start with before I started gluing them together. So I brought it back into my paint room and using Titebond glue, I placed a bead all along the edge, and then using my finger, I just made sure that the whole edge was covered. I did this for both boards, so there was glue on both of the edges. And then using my large furniture clamps, I made sure to place it perfectly side by side and aligned together. And then I tightened the furniture clamps so the 2 boards would actually adhere together perfectly. But it wasn't perfect. It was far from perfect. And lesson learned. That's, like I said, that's another reason why I love doing these curb shop pieces, because it allows me the comfort to experiment with the furniture in ways that I wouldn't normally do. And what I learned from the glue up is even if you have a slight warp or slight, if it's not 100% straight, don't even bother doing a glue up, because here I ended up with quite the gap. I didn't think these boards were actually that crooked, but once I tried placing them together and gluing them together properly, there was a large gap left here. The next morning I came down and I removed the furniture clamps. The board and the top of the table was glued together nicely, but I did have that gap remaining. I went ahead and applied 2 coats of the Sequoia on the tabletop. Then I let the second coat dry overnight. And on my last video, I shared how much paint was used when I shot it through my paint gun. Here's how much paint was used when I use a brush. So this is a much smaller piece, yet I used a lot more paint. I would say about half this container is gone after the 2 coats. I went ahead and reattached the original knob. And after giving it a look-see, it looked too flat to me. This color is beautiful. It's a lovely antique red, but I decided I needed to highlight all the imperfections to give it dimension and draw the eye to different areas of this piece and really make it look vintage and antique and distressed. So I pulled out Coffee Bean, which is a Dixie Belle chalk paint, and I poured a little into a plate. Using a large brush, I dipped a little bit into the coffee bean and then wiped off the remaining, so it really gave me a dry brush to work with. Wherever there were imperfections on this piece, I added some of the coffee bean. So I'm really trying to highlight all the imperfections to draw your eye to them rather than pretend that they're not even there. And I've done this method on numerous pieces of furniture that I've had. It's kind of opposite of what you think should happen because, you know, if you think about it, you think, oh, I got to hide that. But this works really, really well. Now, if you get some of the paint in an area where you don't want it, you can just use, and I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes, you can take a shop towel, spritz it with a little bit of water, and the paint will come right off. You just need to rub it off. While it's still wet, it's easy peasy. So I know this looks really scary at first. You know, you're putting this dark black paint on a nicely freshly painted piece. But what I do is I have a damp sponge next to me. I have the shop towels next to me. What I'm doing is kind of antiquing and distressing it. Rather, you can do this with glaze as well, but it goes quicker with paint because it dries so fast. So you work rather quickly with it. While the paint is wet, you wet it even more with the sponge and you kind of spread it where you want it. And then taking the shop towel, I wipe the excess away. I went ahead and I did the same distressing technique on the drawers, the knob, and also the turned legs. And after she was all painted and distressed, no top coat was needed because the top coat is included in the paint formula. So just as a refresher, here's the before. And here's the after. And I cannot wait to hear what you think of this one. It's been quite a while since I've done a distressed antique vintage piece, and I had so much fun doing this. Keeping everything original was a lot of fun. I learned something on the glue up. The color, this new color, is beautiful. I think it's perfect for older vintage pieces. It's just lovely. And I think everything came together quite nicely. So please leave me a comment down below to let me know what you think. If you gained any value from this video, give it a like and be sure to subscribe. And you can also find me over at salvagedinspirations.com, where I have over 500 furniture painting tutorials teaching you how to make your furniture beautiful. Until next time, have a fabulous day. Bye, guys.